do have a surfboard up there, a couple of them actually. It's good surfing. But this is what I have as I'm checking the surf. Quite fascinating. And I can talk to you about it later, what it's like and what I have to do and the preparations I have to go into to surf with polar bears. Or sorry, not surf with them, surf in an environment where polar bears are actually at. And so it's quite an intense procedure, but it's well worth the surf. This is the first polar bear I ever saw, 2011. It was a young sub-adult running across from where the dump used to be, running across in front of the bus. Okay, as we made our way out to the tundra. 3 weeks later, this is when I fell in love with polar bears. Okay, when I saw this guy. They are marine mammals. Okay, so they're in the same sort of, like marine mammals. What do you think of when you say marine mammals? Whales, yeah, whales, seals, okay. Yes, they do need to breed, they have live young and they breed there, okay. So they are marine mammals because their environment is marine. They are standing, all the ones we saw yesterday were standing on the ocean. Okay, whilst it was frozen, it was standing on the ocean. All their food source comes from the ocean. They are marine mammals. We talked about fat bears, thin bears. So what we have is we have an index from very fat all the way to skinny. And most of the bears that I've worked with, like for many, many years, I watched them go from sort of this fat average down to thin before they get back on the ice, because they come off the ice and they're off the ice for about 4 months. So I watched them degrade throughout it, and I have seen, sadly, some very, very skinny bears that have passed away. Most of the polar bears, they're an apex predator. They don't have anything hunting them except for us. So most of their deaths are through starvation or the inability to hunt. They are the largest land carnivore. They live between 15 to 25 years. I think the oldest bear personally I've seen was about 22 years old. Okay, once they start approaching their late teens, we start watching, they get old. They start to lose their hair a little bit and they start to just not be able to walk so well. And, they're not so good at hunting. So males are massive, okay? They're absolutely huge. The females are about half the size, okay? And that's where it gets a little bit tricky, because when you've got your sub-adult males just before they're mature, they are the same size as a female. So that's where it gets a little bit tricky. You start looking for other identifying factors. Bears have been used for advertisements or marketing for many, many years. I showed you with the Bundaberg rum. But this one, anyone remember these guys? This is Heidi and Howdy. Any Canadians? No? 1988, Calgary Olympics. This is the Calgary Olympics mascots, Heidi and Howdy. I'm pretty sure we're all there. Okay, 1988, I was only really small, but yes, I was there. What else happened in 1988 Olympics? Anyone remember? Famous. Eddie the Eagle? Oh no, there's Heidi and Howdy. Eddie the Eagle? Yeah? Made a movie about him? Incredible. And these guys? Yeah, it's cool running. So it was quite a phenomenal Olympics in 1988 because of these two big, they were rock stars essentially. They turned both of those into movies. Most of the time, we saw polar bears solitary or with a cub. That is how you're going to see nearly every single polar bear in your life if you ever see more than the ones we've seen. You very, very rarely see them in groups. But if you do, they're known as sleuths. The reasons why they would ever come together is to feed. And even that, they're not real happy. The last time I saw them get a dead whale a couple of years ago, and there was a mum and 2 cubs that were feeding, and a male came over to feed, and she got rid of him. They don't like to share. Why not? Like, they don't get, and we'll get down to it, how much food they eat, and they don't have a chance to eat very much or very often. So they're not going to share. Imagine if you hadn't eaten, or you only have about 50 meals a year. Okay, you get a meal every 5 to 6 days. You think you're going to share it? If you find a really big buffet? Absolutely not. You're going to gorge yourself, and then when there's something left, you'll share it. And that's what happens here. There's such an abundance of food that they allow each other to share it. The other time you'll see it, this is a photograph I took a couple of years ago when I was up in Canada, and we took a helicopter ride to go and see what the population was like. And these, how many bears can you count? I mean, you guys are all good at looking at bears now. How many can we see?
8, 10, 11, 13,
You guys have been practicing. Who says more than 5? Who says more than 8? Who says more than 10? I like to see, I want to see whether you guys are finding those. I counted 9. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. These ones are branches, tree branches. Yeah, I know it's hard, isn't it? There's another one. Am I missing one? Whereabouts? Top left, top right. This one here? That's a log. It's driftwood. And it's interesting because you noticed when we looked at them yesterday, are they white? No, they've got like a kind of an off-colour yellow. Now, what else is yellow up here, or kind of that off-colour? We've talked about them a lot. They're on the underside of sea ice. The phytoplankton, the algae. What happens is when we're moving all that sea ice, or it does it automatically, it flips up. And all of a sudden we have this yellow thing that's about the size of a polar bear, and about at 3 or 4 kilometres away, guess what it looks like? Looks like a polar bear sleeping. So there's many times we're looking and we're like, oh, there's a bear. And you're trying to figure out if it's a sleeping bear or whatever. So yeah, the fact that you think those are bears, it's fine. Okay, you're just at the beginnings of your career of polar bear watching. All right, so yes, we have 9 bears there. Now the reason why they've come together because just behind here is like sort of this gets filled in with water at high tide, but it's a big bay called the Hudson Bay, and now they're waiting for it to freeze. They come off the ice at some point, and then they walk to this area. This is Cape Churchill, and they wait for months and months and months. Okay. For the sea ice to form. This is the first place in the bay that it forms. So they've known this over years. It's because of the amount of water coming from the rivers and whatnot. But that is the first area in the bay to form ice, and that means they can go out and hunt. Because they can't hunt on land, so not significantly anyway. So they're waiting and waiting, and that's what I mean. That's why it's a really good place to, well, that's why I worked there, because it's easy to find them. Okay, but everybody wants that photograph of them on the ice. Okay, and that's why you guys are extremely lucky, and that's the reason why I love coming up here. Alright, so that's another reason why they would come together. This is their range at the moment. Okay, we've got the Arctic Circle, which is the black dotted line, and we've got the green part, which is their overall range of the polar bear. The dark green is where we find high concentrations of bears, and that's because of it's a lot shallower, and there's a lot more seals in that region. But traditionally, it hasn't been always their range. Now, we've got this light blue line that we can see. That's their current range. But if you have a look at all those dots outside of it, these are where fossils have been found outside of their modern range. And also inside, okay? So these are these ones. Okay, but they've found fossils of polar bears outside of their current range. Why? They wander. But they're not, this is Europe. Bottom of the UK, Denmark. Polar bears are not going to wander that far. But, yeah, I know, unless they're a little bit lost. The ice was there, correct. During the last glacial period, or the successive ones prior to that, this range has moved with the ice and back, in and out. So the range has moved, okay, with the climate. This is the current subpopulations, okay? It depends on who you talk to, but this is the Canadian one. There's 19 subpopulations, okay? And they're broken down into population trends. So, is the population increasing? Is the population decreasing? Is it stable? Or do we not have enough data to know what's going on? And this is fascinating because who here thinks that polar bear population is decreasing? Who thinks it's increasing? Who thinks it's stable? Awesome. Some of you are not sure. All right. Let's have a look. The current population is between 22,000 and 30,000, okay? Depending on who you talk to, but approximately 26,000 polar bears on the planet. What is happening within these subpopulations? So I broke it down into a pie graph for us, it's a lot easier. Decreasing 17% of the populations, the subpopulations 12, 7, and 64, we're not sure. Now that's not talking about the overall population, so that's just me breaking down that last chart into a pie graph. There's a more interesting one that I'm going to show you in a moment. When we go onto the Government of Canada website and we start looking at their research on polar bears, this is quite a lot of reading. But See, they say there's 13 subpopulations. Like I said, it depends on who you talk to, okay? And it depends on which part of their website you go onto, obviously. But when we break it down to, this one has broken down into populations, not subpopulations, but the overall populations and what's happening to them, okay? So what I've done here, so let me just give you an idea. It says 4 subpopulations are most locally stable, blah, 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 including this, including this, including this. At the present time, this one is comprising 29.3%. So 29.3% of the overall population of polar bears is stable. And then it keeps going. Like I said, I won't go into it too much. But when we break it down, 29 of the polar bears' overall population is stable. 29% we're not sure what's happening with them. 28 is decreasing, and 14% of the polar bears' population is increasing. Interesting, right? It's more stable than it is decreasing. Half is increasing when you compare to decreasing. And obviously a third we're not sure about. The ones we're not sure about tend to be over Russia or the Arctic where we were, because it's just too hard to get research into that area. It's too expensive. Not what you would have thought when you think about population trends with polar bears, correct? So why are they going on and on? The media, whoever it is, going on about scientists, going on about polar bears being, they are the poster child for climate change. Their population is going to disappear. We're going to lose polar bears. This is probably what you would have heard, and that's what I heard. But when you look at that, that's what's happening.
It's complicated.
It's complicated. Here we go. Fantastic. This is what we're going to get into. If we go into the IUCN, this is what they said. In the light of significant probability across scenarios of a reduction in the mean global population size greater than 30% and the relatively low probability of a reduction greater than 50%, we conclude that polar bears currently warrant listing as a vulnerable species. And this is why. Because if we look at what we talk about, which is called a carrying capacity, every species on the planet, including us, as humans, have a carrying capacity for that environment. We can only be so many humans on this planet before we have problems. And you see it with many different animals, okay? There's an amount that the environment can hold, whether it's the habitat or the amount of food availability. And you see it with huge fluctuations in lemmings, for example. Okay, we have like slight increase, and then there'll be an absolute boom of lemmings. And then what we've realized is there's not enough food for them, and they have a huge die-off. And then actually we have Arctic fox that are linked to that. We have Arctic fox populations boom after lemmings populations boom, because there's an abundance of food, so they can support lots of Arctic fox. And guess what happens the next year? There's not enough food to support them, and you have a die-off. So it can be food availability, as well as, down the bottom right-hand corner, degrading carrying capacity may be due to resource destruction. Now, what happens? Polar bears, what do they live on where they need to get food? Sea ice. Now, this is the carrying capacity at the moment. Polar bears can go up, they can go live above that, and all of a sudden there's not enough food or space and they die off. And then they go down and then there's lots. And they go up. And this is what happens with majority of species on the planet. Now, if that carrying capacity, if that amount of food or sea ice starts to go down, guess what happens to the population? It goes down as well. And that is what they're concerned about. Whilst currently the population is doing okay. Future projections are that once we start to lose more and more sea ice, we're going to see a population trend going down, because there's not enough sea ice for the amount of bears on the planet. All of southern ones, which is the ones I've worked on, need to come off the ice for longer. They need to starve for longer. Okay, make sense? Good. Oh, this just gives you an idea of bear density. There's not that many, okay, as we're aware of. Okay, they have a huge habitat range. Was that half a bear every 100 kilometers squared? All right, so bears, if we look at the evolutionary of bears, the Ursus genus, we've got brown bears and polar bears together over here. They split roughly maximum 500,000 years ago, 500,000 years ago. Some people estimate only 150,000, but most experts estimate between 400 and 500,000 years ago that they diverged. Look at the difference of them. Incredible, hey? Only 500,000 years ago. Humans have been around longer than that. All right, which is interesting because if we go back to when they diverged, this is a chart showing natural climate change. Okay, we have gone through glacial and interglacial periods throughout history, where we have a larger extent of sea ice and then of ice and glaciers and everything in the cryosphere, and then we have a reduction, and then we have an expansion, then we have a reduction. Okay, we are currently in an interglacial period, a natural warming part of the planet, which means that polar bears have gone through and survived multiple times of the expansion of ice on the planet and the reduction of ice on the planet, and then expansion and reduction. Okay. This is an interesting video from National Geographic.
You're also looking at the polar bear, and by the way, best research has discovered that in every polar bear that's alive today, there's a bit of the Irish. You wouldn't think of polar bears being in Ireland, but first of all, how does that happen? How are they all connected to the Irish?
Well, did you see in the news recently, in the last couple of years, that there are polar bear, brown bear hybrids that people have found, hunters have found in
happening
Canada
now as the climate is changing.
Yeah, and so that's happening because polar bears and brown bears are actually not that different from each other. They only diverged from a common ancestor probably around 500,000 years ago, or maybe less than that. So they're still very closely related to each other, and they can breed and produce fertile hybrid offspring. And it turns out that they do this whenever their ranges overlap. And the last time their ranges overlapped was actually around the last ice age, just before the last ice age, where a lot of ice was formed over the North Pole, and it pushed polar bears onto land. The extent of their habitat was at the edge of this ice flow, which was on land. And brown bears, because there were glaciers on land, were pushed to the edge of their habitat. And again, they interbred.
And Ireland happened to be the meeting point.
And it happened to have happened in Ireland, indeed. And so an Irish brown bear is actually the mother of all living polar bears.
And none of the Irish bears are left today.
No, Irish bears, brown bears have been extinct in Ireland since about 6,000, maybe 8,000 years ago.
Fascinating. What to get out of that video is that when she talked about the ranges overlapping, we're seeing this happening at the moment where, as we're having this warming part of the planet, we're seeing the brown bears going further north, and they're going into the southern part of the polar bear's range. And there's a place where I was working in Churchill, there's a place called Wapust National Park, and it's a female denning area. And now they've noticed that they've been getting brown bears in there, and only recently black bears as well. So we've got all three, polar bears, brown bears, and black bears, all in Wapust National Park. And so they're interested to see what's going to happen in the future, especially as it's not becoming it's becoming more and more common, essentially. We're seeing more and more brown bears in where females den.
It was in news where the grizzlies and polar bears are, mating, and there's a hybrid. It was in the news.
Yeah. So this is when I talk about grizzlies. Grizzlies are a subspecies of a brown bear. I just use brown bears because you can have grizzlies, Kodiaks, all different types of brown bears. Now, with you're exactly right. They actually produce a hybrid, and lots of animals do it. Okay, donkeys, horses create a mule, but is the mule fertile or sterile? Sterile. And so that's the end of that. What they found with brown bears and polar bears is they produce, because they're so close genetically, that they actually produce a fertile offspring. So they can, and they've actually just discovered, a couple of years ago, a second generation hybrid. So what's happened is we've had a brown bear and polar bear produce a hybrid. That hybrid is now mated and created another one. Okay, so interesting thoughts about the future of polar bears. And it's not one I talk about in this lecture. if we get a chance during one of the recaps, I might talk about the future of polar bears through hybridization, and I show a bunch of maps where the populations cross over and go into it a little bit more. It's a full topic, and there's not enough time in a lecture to talk about it. But a lot of this stuff I'm telling you is really, really brief, because you guys have an incredible resource to continue down the path of research yourself. Google, the internet. There's lots of information out there. Just if you're not sure about whether you believe it or whatever, come and have a talk to me, and I can go through it with you. All right, we talked about the habitats crossing over, and that's because we have this degrading sea ice. So this is a sea ice chart, and whilst I talked about it briefly, we have these years where we have huge amount of sea ice, and then we have these years of less sea ice, and that doesn't really mean a whole lot. It's just natural fluctuations year to year, but the general trend is down, and the projections are further down. Whilst this is from 2011, I could almost guarantee that it continues in that direction. And we're going to see more of this sort of behaviour. Okay, this is a rubbish dump, and once again, we talked about them coming together when there's an abundance of food. Humans are creating this abundance of food. Anyone remember what a group is called? You guys are awesome. Sleuth, yes. All right, we're going to talk about bone structure for a second, especially in the skull. Like I said, they live to 15 to 25 years. They have 42 teeth. The main ones we're concerned about are these huge canines at the front and these molars at the back. And the way we can age a bear is through this tiny little tooth, I should say, in front of the molars. It's called a premolar. And what we do is we take it out, and then we're going to send her away for analysis. And when we do that, we actually lift up the gum of the polar bear and we tattoo the gum, and then we tag him or her on the ear. It has changed a little bit with DNA testing, but we still do that as well. With the differences between the brown bear and the polar bear, having a look at their teeth structure. If we have a look at the polar bears on the left, you can see longer canines. Okay, not so many molars. This is going to show that it's purely a carnivore. Okay, it's a carnivorous diet. Whereas the brown bears, they eat meat, but they also eat berries and all sorts of things. Yeah, so they're omnivorous, and you can see that their teeth structure has brought that in as well. Quite a decent move, hey, in only like 500,000 years. This is a cross-section of a tooth of a polar bear, that premolar, and you can actually start counting the layers. It's like tree rings. And that's how we age the bear. And once you only need to take the tooth out once. It's got the tattoo, so when we do a recapture, so we recapture the bear, we read the tattoo, we know it was captured last 3 years ago and it was 8 years old. So then we can figure it out that way. Sometimes we get bears that have broken teeth. Okay, so this is a canine on the left-hand side that's broken. Okay, that's not real good because it can get, as you know, with teeth, if you break a tooth, you expose the root canal and it can get infected. Now we're going to get into the more important stuff. The sexual reproduction cycle of polar bears. Alright, stuff everybody loves. Alright, so they're sexually mature if they're female from 4 to 5 years old, and their males are 8 to 10 years old. What's fascinating about that is a female, like I said, the oldest female I've seen personally is about 22 years old. So if they start breeding at 5 years old, that gives them, 17 years of breeding life, and they're not going to breed really at the end of their life, okay? Same as humans, you're not breeding right at the end of your life. They are fertile almost to the end, but they're just old. They're not good at hunting, so anyway, let's break it down to say 15 years. 15 years they can produce offspring. And then we'll talk about in a moment how long it takes to bring up one or two cubs. Okay, and then work out how many bears per female. Alright, they breed in springtime, okay, if they don't have a cub. They're induced ovulators, so which means they don't have a cycle like a human. They don't ovulate every month. They will ovulate when having sex, so they're induced ovulators. So what you'll find is like a male, like you can see down the bottom here. This was on one of the ships I was on a couple of years ago up in Svalbard in this area. And what happens is they'll have sex with the female, but you got to get it ready. So all of a sudden she's like, well, okay, I need to start ovulating. So usually the first time they have sex, she's not ovulating, so it won't happen. So he stays around for about 2 weeks and has sex with her multiple times. So it gets induced in the first time roughly, and then afterwards it will become fertile one of the other times afterwards. The gestation period, okay, is 3 to 5 months? Oh, no, sorry, I'm doing this wrong. 6 to 8 months. But the problem is, it needs to be on a 12-month cycle. Okay, you can't keep having it earlier and earlier because you'll find out later there's no prey in certain parts of the year. So how do you have a gestation period of less than 12 months and still have the birth at the same time every year? Okay. It's called delayed implantation. We'll talk about that in a moment. Here it is here. What happens is the egg becomes fertile till day 5, okay, and then that blastocyst just sits in the womb. And only when the female has the body condition to support a cub will it become implanted and then continue through its cycle. It's really good because if the female hasn't had enough to eat, if she has a cub, she's going to kill both of them because the cub won't be able to drink the milk because she will die because she's not healthy enough. So it's really important that they get to the stage where, okay, I'm ready, I can have a child, and then they have one. So it's delayed implantation for that reason, and also because they need to be born at the same time every year. Oh yeah, 5 litters in a lifetime. Because and I'll talk about it in a moment, but I'll give you a little as how you figure that out. The cub stays with the mother till the 3rd spring. Okay, so they're just over 2 years old. And then she can't have a child till the next spring, generally. So you're looking at 3 to 4 years between cubs. Over 15 years. It's not a lot. Okay. 5 litters. Yes, they do have twins. Okay. I've heard of triplets, never seen it. But yes, they do have twins as well. So you're looking at maximum 10 cubs, but somewhere between 5 and 10. And that's if they breed every 3 years. And are successful. Okay, because depends on who you talk to, but most cubs will survive to sub-adulthood, only about 30%, give or take. There's not a lot. If there's a big change in polar bear populations, they can't recover real quick because they don't have a lot of them. She will go into a den, okay, and basically hibernate whilst the cubs are being born. She will lose about half of her weight while she's in there. They have earth dens. Okay, so they'll dig into the earth and the snow will cover them in. And it's really cool. You can actually, in the summer, when they're not using them, you can actually go and check them out in certain parts of the world. They recently, so a good mate of mine, Ian Sterling, he actually found, a couple of years ago, dens on sea ice that were not in the earth. So they have the ability to breed on the floating sea ice. And they do it in old hummocks, which is the compression ridges that have degraded. This is what they look like. Yeah, super cute, hey? They're about the size of a rat, about 500 grams. Okay, which is about 1,000 times smaller than their mum. Okay? You think about it as a human and you have a baby that comes out of the womb 1,000 times smaller. Can you imagine how tiny it would be? So the reason why they do that, the reason why they don't hold onto it or hold into it in a womb like humans, is because of the amount of energy it takes for that polar bear to do that. So it's easier to get the baby out, and then they don't have to process the waste and to do a bunch of other things. And the den is essentially a womb. Okay, so the bear, the little tiny polar bear, will come out and it attaches itself to the nipple, and that's where it stays while it gets larger and larger and larger. And then it emerges. It's about 10 kilos, about the size of a dog. Super cute. And that's why that video at the very front, the very first video, that's why you can tell it's a newborn. Okay, also known as a koi, a cub of the year. Yeah, pretty cute. I can tell you right now, this is not on the sea ice. You've got these trees in the background. Actually, you can see all the branches have come off on one side. We call those flag trees because it looks like a flag. Okay, because the predominant wind is coming from the right-hand side and just basically taking away all those branches. So it's in the boreal forest. They don't have the ability to swim, okay? Or they have the ability to swim, but their coat is not ready. Kind of like birds with down, okay? It's not ready, it's not able to be waterproof, they'll probably just sink. Okay, so yeah, there have been instances of them carrying their cubs.
It's March, and light returns to the high Arctic, sweeping away 4 months of darkness. A polar bear stirs. She has been in her den the whole winter. Her emergence marks the beginning of spring. After months of confinement underground, she toboggans down the slope, perhaps to clean her fur, perhaps for sheer joy. Her cubs gaze out at their bright new world for the very first time. The female calls them, but this steep slope is not the easiest place to take your first step. But they are hungry and eager to reach their mother, who's delayed feeding them on this special day. Now she lures them with the promise of milk, the only food the cubs have known since they were born, deaf and blind beneath the snow, some 2 months ago. Their mother has not eaten for 5 months and has lost half her body weight. Now she converts the last of her fat reserves into milk for her cubs. The spring sun brings warmth, but also a problem for the mother. It starts to melt the sea ice. That is where she hunts for the seal she needs to feed her cubs, and she must get there before the ice breaks up. For now, though, it's still minus 30 degrees, and the cubs must have the shelter of the den.
Amazing, isn't it? So cute. A couple of different things just to reiterate. Were they on the sea ice or on land? Land, okay. So this is a thing that you're not used to thinking about. Okay, they den on the land predominantly. And she talked about going out into the sea ice. So that once it starts to melt, that sea ice is going to recede away from the land. So it's time to get on it and move with it. The mum will feed the cubs with their milk for about 20 months. Okay, and like in a moment I'll show you a graph of the timeline. It kind of gets a bit tricky with all the dates and stuff. These guys are fat. Yeah, this one has to, these guys almost have to have left very, very soon after this photograph. They are big. So here's the timeline. So this is what the male does. The male breeds, and that's all it has to do. What the female has to do is mate, then delay the implantation, okay, to figure out whether she can get enough food over the summer, and around September time, it happens. She's like, she doesn't consciously think about it, but her body will let the fertilized egg know it's time to, whether to be reabsorbed or to attach itself and become a cub. They enter the den, they give birth around Christmas time, and then they emerge. Okay, at the beginning of spring, and then it's time to feed throughout the summer again. What will happen is she will feed, okay, They go through another winter, and then it's the next one that she will, so she keeps them for, it's a third spring. So 1, 2,